Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans.
Parents, please be advised that this episode should be listened to by parents first, before sharing with your children. It's best to listen to the sensitive material in this episode first so that you're prepared to help support your children in navigating the conversations we're about to discuss. So if children are in your presence, please listen to this episode at another time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I am so excited for our show today. We can welcome back Slesha Patel for the 3rd time. She is amazing. And today she's going to be talking to us about how to teach your teenage daughters or girls when too much is too much. And I think that topic just says it all. With that, let's get to Slesha.
Thank you for round 3. I'm so excited.
Yes. Okay. So today we're going to talk about talking or teaching our daughters when too much is too much. And when we were talking about doing this podcast, it's like there's a lot of different things, but we've both experienced, and I'm sure all women have, of like too much. Right. And where do we draw the line, and what does that mean exactly? So I think girls can put a lot of pressure on themselves to succeed. And there's so many areas that obviously we could highlight in this. It could be sports for some people, grades, social success. It really varies for all of us. But what do you think can be the negative consequences of putting too much pressure on ourselves?
Burnout is the first thing that comes to mind. And I mean, I remember being in that boat where like there's just so much going on as a teenager. Like your body's changing, your brain is changing, hormones are all over the place, like social dynamics are changing. School is like getting harder and harder. Like the material's getting harder, but there's more and more homework, and you have to get better and better at sports too. And I'm still getting used to my new center of gravity after growing 6 inches over a summer. And it's just a lot to handle. And also as a teenager, you're like now starting to like shift gears to like what happens after I graduate from high school. Then what are my plans? And so it's a tremendous amount of pressure. And I used to feel like I had to be perfect, because if I wasn't, then I would never get into a good school to go to for college. And then I would never get a good job. And then my whole life would be in shambles. And it's like a tremendous amount of pressure to have on a teenager. But it's like, unfortunately, things happen so fast in those few years. And by the time you're 18 now, you're an adult. Like that's a lot to handle, even if there weren't all these other things going on.
Yeah.
And I felt like, you know, I think like by the time I got to college, I was just so exhausted. Like I really thought college would be the best time of my life. But by the time I got there, I was like, I'm tired. I barely got here. Like the goal was to get here. And now like it's only going to get harder. Like there's even more that's expected out of me. And now I am a whole adult too. So like I just think like our the way that our society is structured too is not in our favor.
Yeah. We really go from being kids, right, to adults in 4 years. That's insane.
It's so fast. And like you're learning to drive during those years, responsibilities. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And
And
I
then
didn't do it really well.
yeah. Well, and you have like it's like you add dating in there, and you like, right. So we're like navigating so many different areas. Every single area is shifting, and all in 4 years. And we're all supposed to figure it out. And it's so much pressure. So
Mhm.
burnout is great. And I think along with that, I mean, mental health challenges,
Yeah.
right? Like people
Oh,
who have
man.
never been anxious before are anxious.
Oh,
People
yeah.
who have never been depressed before are depressed. People who have never had trouble with time management are maybe struggling with time management, and maybe relationships, and their identity is changing, right? In whatever ways that can. Like there's so many things. So you're self-exploring, you're exploring your environment, there's just a lot of demands. So I think it's the potentially a perfect opportunity for self-destruction, right? To go down some
Yeah.
really unfortunate paths that can change our lives. So I mean, it can be really negative, but also on the flip side, it's like in 4 years, you're also having this opportunity to like make decisions about your life and decide what you want to be and where you want to live and being able to decide who your roommates are and like all these different great opportunities and like how much do you want to play basketball? Like, actually I'm done. I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And so you do get some freedom in that, right? And driving is a huge freedom. Um but there's also expectations that come along with that. So it's a tricky spot to navigate. So I agree.
Yeah.
Burnout for sure.
Super tricky. And I mean, you make a great point. Like I had my first depressive symptoms when I was, around 16 or 17 years old. And it's like it came all of a sudden and it really felt like there wasn't anything that warranted it. Like I didn't have anything like traumatic or tragic that happened in my life, so to speak. But I think like just like a lot of too much is too much. And it all kind of added up for me.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think parents need to be aware of in terms of pressure and their daughters?
I think that sometimes it's hard to understand that your kid is getting pressure from every possible angle. It's even if you're a chill parent and you feel like you're not really putting pressure and you're just there to support your kid is getting pressure from like their teachers, their counselors, their coaches, their friends, social media now, themselves. Like they have
Mhm.
expectations for themselves of the person that they want to become and what they want to do with their life. And so I just feel that like just knowing that it's a scary time for them, they may not be able to like feel that they can share all those things because they know that these are expectations that are set. Like there's no way out of some of these things. So
Mhm.
why bother even bringing it up?
Mhm.
So just understanding that like they're in a really tough spot and anything that you can do to kind of like help them talk about it more or help them problem solve it when they want that is huge.
Yeah. So bringing up, like checking in, right? Doing these
Mhm.
kind of like pulse points of like how are things going, which is sometimes hard because it looks like on the outside as a parent, like it's fine. Like everything's fine. They seem happy,
Mhm.
right? But like checking in to be like, how are you feeling, right? And a lot of times I'll ask my kids that. I don't have any like true teenagers yet, but I'll ask them like, how was your day? Like what feeling did you have most? And like how would you rate that? So like 0 would be none of that feeling, 10 would be the most. It's like, are you super happy? Right? Are you really?
Mhm.
Or is it like I'm a 2 happy? Because that's not very happy. I mean, it's still happiness, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, what's getting in the way of that? Because I would say your normal is like a 5, right? So like,
Mhm. Mhm.
where did something not go how you expected, right? To be more curious versus just taking the outside appearance. Because it's easy to do. Like with the hustle of life, it's easy to just be like, okay, that's good. Everything looks fine.
Right, and you know that your kid's not alone, like, there's also, like, dozens of other children that are in the exact same boat, and so you're like, "Ah, this is just how things are going."
Yeah. Yeah. So getting curious about that part. And I think maybe some kids do need some more scaffolding in terms
Mhm.
of getting themselves to their full potential. But there's a lot of kids who really don't need a lot of that. Like intrinsically, they are more pushing themselves for perfection, right? So then you amplifying that might actually cause more negative impacts than positive ones. So thinking about like they, get back a B on their math test and a B in my mind is great, right? But if I'm a parent who's like, I expect an A, or maybe my kid normally gets an A, I would say like, hey, how are you feeling about that math test that you did the other day? And they're like, oh, I got a B. And it's like, okay, like, how do you feel about that? I feel really
Yeah.
good because it was super, super hard. It's like, okay, amazing. That's great. Or they're like, I feel really bad about it. Tell me about that. Why do you feel bad? Well, I didn't manage my time very well. And so I didn't get to study as much as I should have. And so I think I could have done better. And then, my question next would be like, what would you like to do about that? Are there any choices here? Right? Because sometimes you get a retake. Because I mean, as a
Yeah,
parent, I'm not reading my kids' syllabuses, and so I don't know what their syllabi say. And
yeah,
so it's like I don't know what all the options are, and they may not want to use it on that, right? Like a B is still good, so they may say, I'm going to hold on to that, right? Because of whatever reasons, and just being curious about that, like, oh, okay, cool. Tell me what helped you to make that decision. But it's allowing them. I mean, if our kids are failing, obviously there's something not right there, right? Like we should want to succeed, especially in school and in life. And so getting curious about like, it seems like you're feeling sad a lot of the time. Can you help me to understand what's going on? Or like, what feeling are you having that you don't want anybody to know about? Right? Like that kind of part,
Yeah.
sometimes opening those like deeper questions. Like, is there anything that you happened today that like you wish that you could redo? Or
Mhm.
you would want to erase from your day? And I don't ask those questions every day, but like every once in a while to just get a barometer about like how things are going. But I think the pressure that we put on our kids sometimes can be too much.
Oh yeah, completely. I already know that like I'm gonna be a parent that applies a little bit of pressure because unfortunately, like my husband and I both grew up with like relatively strict parents. Like if he got a 98% on an exam, like they would literally be like, what happened to the other 2 points? Like that was their first question and that was their response. And so they were really expecting perfection.
Mhm.
And then on the flip side, I was only rewarded or praised when I did really exemplary and exceptional work. And so
Mhm.
anything that felt middle of the road, like a regular A, was not enough. Like an A plus, okay, now I'm gonna say that you did a good job.
Mhm.
And so it's like we just grew up in this like environment and this like own structure of like promoting that perfection and them really truly thinking that we would be nothing in our lives without that level of exemplary marks and
Yeah.
grades and feedback from teachers. And so like it's just it was kind of a lot to handle and I think like I will probably slowly be breaking away from that mentally
Mhm.
um with my own children because it's not like my parents won't be around. Like I'm hoping that they're going to be around.
Sure. Yeah.
And so like I know that they'll still be a part of their lives. And so it's kind of like kind of course correcting a little bit and making
Mhm.
sure that, you know, my own kids will feel supported.
Yeah. Well, and as grandparents, that role changes a ton, right? So like grandparents are not generally expected to take care of the kids academically when they
Mhm.
are the grandparent role and not the parent role, right? Like things shift in that, so that's good. But then also like I think, parents can also let their parents know how we're doing things differently.
Mhm.
Like I know that we did it like this, but like this is the type of way that we're going to handle this situation. It's hard. Those conversations can be so hard, but so valuable. And the sooner you address it, the sooner that other person, whoever it is, learns how to do it differently in your kid's life. So it's like
That's
if
game changing,
being
guys.
talking about those things like grades, right? Like we want to support our kids if they think they did a good job. And so then your parents can easily get behind that idea. And so can other, grandparents and relatives of like, or we're
Yeah.
not going to talk about grades. We're going to talk about what successes they've had, right? Or how I can support them or like what skill I have that they'd like to learn.
Yeah.
Um, and so it can be a totally different role, but like we can renegotiate those things. And as people are going in those journeys, I mean, it's never too late, even if you have a teen and you're like, okay, we want to rewrite how grandparents are addressing these things or what things they're talking about, then we can do that. Like it
That's
is
huge. That's
allowed.
game changing. I love that.
Yeah.
Really breaking that cycle and like resetting.
Yeah. And we're all learning, right? So like
Yeah.
our parents did the best that they could and
Mhm.
that's what they, were trained and are taught. And so then when we learn that something can be better, then it is our responsibility to also let people know, right? Like we're going to do
Mhm.
this a little bit differently because we think it's better. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
cool. Okay, so can you share some of your story and how pressure impacted you?
Yeah. So I think like I mentioned that my depressive symptoms started around like when I was a teenager. And I think even before that, I remember being 15 years old and just sitting down on my bed and we had just moved into a newer home. And so I gotten a new mattress because I upgraded from like my, twin bed to now a queen bed in this new room. And I remember just sitting down on the bed and just like immediate instantaneous tears just because it felt so good to just sit down. And it was like a busy week of school. And I remember I was both on JV and varsity field hockey because it was like one of those things where you're young. And so they want to keep you on JV, but like you're talented enough to play varsity as well. And so I was playing both sets of games, which is not like a low level field of, play. Like it's now like
Yeah.
a game is harder in itself. And so I was just trying to keep up with that plus school, and all my extracurriculars. And I was just so tired. Like it was really all just too much. And it felt like I had no choice. Like this is what everyone else is doing. Somehow everyone else is succeeding with this. So why
Mhm.
am I struggling with it? And it's about like, I think like, I didn't understand that like everyone's not the same. Like sometimes like some people need 30 minutes to learn a math concept. Some people need 2 hours to learn the same math concept, right? Like there's some flexibility there in my own journey that I didn't understand that I had. Like I just felt like I had to be like on par with the masses of what everyone else was experiencing.
Mhm.
And even summers felt like critical times. Like if you didn't come back with a glow up, then like what did you even do over the summer?
Mhm.
And so I felt like that was really hard. And I remember at 15 feeling like my body is telling me no, but there's nothing I can do about it. I just felt really stuck. And I remember the next time that happened to me, I was 27 years old. And I was in my dream job at the time. So it wasn't like I was aspiring to do like, I mean, I wanted to grow in my job, of course, but it was like I made it. Like I had my I made it moment. I was living my dream. And I was still feeling that way. And I felt that so aggressively. And my body again was like telling me no. Um, I did have a couple of suicide attempts, my most recent one being in 2020. And I really hope that I never go down that path again. But I wholeheartedly now, having had those experiences, believe that like you have to like kind of take a little bit of control of your own life. And you have to like take directions from yourself. You have to
Mhm.
learn how to like take that feedback from yourself and figure out what you can do in your power to change it without paying attention to anyone else's plans or where they're at. If that means you need to take a gap year, if that means that you need to like put yourself into some program, like it is what it is. Like you're on your own journey, you're on your own path, and like it doesn't reflect on you poorly to take longer to accomplish something or to achieve your goals. Like that's okay. Like we can do things later in life in a healthy way instead of living with that trauma and like resentment and symptoms that are just getting worse and worse because you're not dealing with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I thank you so much for talking about the suicidal attempts that you had because I think that's something too that is so hard and people often don't want to share that because it feels so raw. And I want to say if anybody out there is having any suicidal thoughts, please reach out to your loved ones, talk to your primary doctor, get support from a therapist, something to help you navigate what is making you feel that way because ultimately I would say now you would say is so worth all the work that you did to get to be where you are today.
Yeah, completely. And I think that like if you're feeling really stuck and the people in your inner circle aren't giving you the kind of support or you're not like feeling any sense of relief and hope from that, keep trying, keep seeking somebody new out. And it's painful to do and it takes a tremendous amount of bravery and courage. I wish somebody had told me back then that it is so worth it on the other side
Mhm.
when you can look back at your journals from that time and be like, wow, I was in a really dark place and be like, I don't feel any of that anymore.
Yeah.
And you might not think it's possible for yourself. I really thought I was going to have to live whatever days, years I had left in my life like that. And that's just not the case. And I think a big part of the reason I'm willing to speak about it so openly is because I am in a better place right now. Otherwise, it would be really hard for me to go back and reflect on that time because it really just felt like a place where you can't get out of it. It really felt
Mhm.
that way. But if you're not getting the kind of like support and warmth that you need from someone or anyone, just keep seeking that out. Be brave enough to give yourself that chance.
Yeah. It's worth it. It's so worth it,
Yeah.
right? To get to the place where you're feeling better. And I think, there's the suicide hotlines, right? There's people to
Yes.
talk to. You can do texting now, which I think is great to offer that resource because sometimes we feel like we can't talk about it, but we could text about it. I
Mhm.
think keep advocating for yourself, but pressure can really become toxic when we have too much of it.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think we can do to help our daughters manage pressure?
I think that it comes down to like really having a lot of empathy without expectations. So creating an open and supportive dialogue where you really show your daughter that you have absolutely no judgment and you just want what they want. Even if it's not exactly what you want, just showing them that it is so that they feel safe enough to bring up what they need to bring up so that you can actually help them. Just knowing that like nothing is more important than their life. And so really bringing that as a first priority, and everything else can wait. And really just knowing that everything that you do, your every move, even like how your face reacts to something, is going to stick with them and can really like ruin their whole week. Like they really may be fighting for their life just based on a simple facial expression that you made. If they don't know how to read it, or if they do and it's not what they want to see, just knowing that like you need to approach this with all the love and empathy and kind of leave your own personality at the door for a second just to really be there for them, because you've worked this hard to raise this child. So at this point, like you're clearly invested. So in order for them to really succeed, like just helping them, helping yourself help them is really, really critical. I think that I wish my parents would have been willing to take more drastic risks with me. I think they thought like my dad grew up in poverty in India. Like he was separated from his family. He's a refugee of Burma. And so he was lucky to have an education. And so when he put me in this school, he's like, this is the best school in this area. Like I'm spending all my money on this private school for you. And so he thought, this is my dream for you. Maybe it wasn't the right path for me. It was for my brother. My brother had a great experience, but I think every kid is different. And every situation is different. And I think for me, like just either taking a gap year at some point within high school or after high school or switching schools would have been like a game changer for me, because it would have at least made me feel just that little ounce better. And when you're that dark and that deep in it, that little ounce is all you need. You just need a little bit to get you a little bit further. I'd already skipped a quarter of my junior year. And so at that point, it wasn't like, what do we even have to lose at this point? So I just wish that like we had been willing to take more risks and at least engage in a conversation. Like at that point, like for me, it wasn't a conversation that I could have had with my parents. Like they were not willing to have that. So just know that like as a parent, like if you are willing to have conversations with your children, and like I know they're young, but they really know what they're talking about. They know how they feel. And if they're willing to communicate that with you, if they're willing to present ideas to you, they're not crazy. Like they really do know what they're talking about. And it's important for parents to like entertain that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Listening, right? Gathering more data, understanding, right? Talking about your concerns as a parent, right? But ultimately, like making the decision together. I mean, obviously, depending on the age and what the circumstances are, but I think, yeah, we have to allow our kids and our teens to like trust themselves. Ultimately, that's going to be one of the best gifts that we can give them, is the
Yeah.
ability for them to navigate situations in the future without us, because unfortunately, we will not survive this life, right? We're not going to
Yeah.
make it out alive. And so that is something that I think about too, is like, how do we teach our kids how to problem solve through this? What options are here? And it is scary to take big risks with our kids. I mean, it is scary, right? Because what if it fails? But
Yeah.
what if it doesn't?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and a lot of times I know that for me in my own life, I don't know if this is true for you, like the scariest, the times where it's like, this is the end. It's over.
This is
Right?
it. Like we're
Like
done.
this is
Back
it.
in the
We're
bag.
done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, have been the times that have been the best and most transformative. Like when I've been put in a situation where I have to do something I'm really scared of, it
Yeah.
actually has a lot of times opened me to something really great, right?
Yes.
Like when I changed my major in school, right? Like I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like this is going
Yeah.
to be the end. And, like changing friend groups or changing schools or whatever it was, right? Like those things are really hard and scary. But I think if your kids are saying things that are talking about their path and their journey and what they're wanting, and they have a direction with it, we definitely need to consider what they're saying.
Yeah, for sure. I know that there was one family that I know of that took a really drastic risk, and they were good friends of mine from maybe my very first school ever through high school, and they decided to just pick up and move their family from Kansas all the way to Florida. And that was the right move for them. And they were willing to take that risk, and I think it paid off. Because it really was not a great situation for them where they were.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't work for everybody, right? Like moving across the
Country
country or to
expensive.
another world. And yeah, there's lots
Yeah.
of barriers that can be in there, but sometimes we do have the resources, or, we have been offered a job in another state that we
Mhm.
could take, that like maybe we should really consider that. Maybe it would be good for us and our kids, right? Like,
Yeah.
considering what doors might open with this, change is hard but good, right? It's one of
Yeah.
the things that is consistent in our lives, is that things are going to change. And back to this part of having suicidal thoughts, like that, I oftentimes will tell my patients, like, when they're in their darkest place, like, I'm holding out hope because I know that this is going to get better, and until you're ready to hold on to the hope, I'll hold it for you.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna make me cry. I just love that.
Yeah, because I mean, really, it's like, I believe, right? Like, I know that it's going to get better, but it's
Yeah.
like sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you can't see it. But
Yeah.
the
It's like
perspective
you're
that
on the team.
yeah, when I am on the outside, and as a therapist who's had lots of families and seen lots of kids and teens and adults, like, I know that it gets better, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it's hard to hold on to that hope when you're in the middle of it. And a lot of times I'll ask them, is it okay if I hold on to this for you? And they're like, yes. And then I'll say, when we're in a better place, are you ready to take this back? Like, this is something I want to give to you because you've done so much great work and you're in a good place. Would you like to hold on to your own hope? And they're like, oftentimes yes. And so, it's a fun conversation, but it's hard. I mean, it's both sides of that. And I think life is that, right? Like, some days are really awesome and some days are really hard,
Mhm.
and it can be from one day to the next. And I think sometimes, like you said, like, nothing happens in particular, but it's everything.
Mhm.
It's a culmination of all the pressure from all the things that we're taking on. And it's like, sometimes I ask people too, like, how can you lighten this load? What's one thing we could take off your plate that we don't need?
Yeah.
um and sometimes it's like, I don't know about you, but if you're aiming for that 100%, you might spend 3 hours on an assignment. Really, you should have spent 30 minutes,
Oh my
right?
gosh. I feel like I wasted so much time, like double checking assignments just so that I could get the grade that like others were expecting me and I was expecting of myself to achieve.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. And so I talked about that too, oftentimes in my office, is like, okay, so what is the difference in how much time it takes to get like a 95 versus a 99?
Mhm.
How much time is that? And is it worth it? Right. And so, or a 90, right? Like, and it depends on your academic setting, right? Different grades and different places are different letter grades. And so, like with those high achievers, it's also like managing that part of like, is it worth it to you? Like, as a parent, I can't come in and tell you that it is or isn't worth it. And as a therapist, I can't tell you that it is or isn't worth it. I can't do that for you, but I can ask you if it's worth it. Because if you're staying up till 2 a.m., it's because you had practice and whatever, and then assignments. And I mean, is that worth it? I mean, for
Mhm.
me personally, as an adult, no, right?
No,
Like, it's
absolutely.
not, right?
Yeah.
Because my sleep is valuable, my relationships with other people are valuable. Yes, getting good grades matters, but not as much as like my overall health. And like, no one in my professional life, now people are going to ask me, but no one in my professional life ever asked me what GPA I got. Like, no one
Yeah.
cares.
No one cares.
No one cares. I have the degree, I have the license. That's all that matters, right? And I remember my parents would say, what do you call the person who graduates first in their class in med school? Doctor. Do you know what they call the last person that graduates in their med school class?
Doc.
Doctor,
Yeah.
right? Same, right? Like, and obviously that is a whole different thing, and what residencies and all the things, right?
Yeah.
But that you get the same title.
Yeah, you're
And
just
so I
looking
think
for it.
it's right. And so sometimes it's about like recognizing, when you graduate from high school, if you were the valedictorian or you were the last person in your class of 400, you're number 400. Okay.
You all still walked away with the exact
Yes,
same
you
diploma.
all got the same diploma, right? Recognizing that piece. So what do you think parents might forget about what it's like to be a teen?
I think like there are times when you feel like you have absolutely no control and it's like you're constantly being told what to do in so many different aspects of your life. And so just knowing that it's like absolutely exhausting sometimes, it's draining sometimes, and like sometimes just being like, if you want your kid to come over to the kitchen table, like sometimes that takes effort. They might be sore from
Mhm.
a sports practice, like just understanding that they have little control and they're dealing with a lot. And so giving them that little ounce of grace whenever you can.
Yeah. So maybe meeting
Okay.
them more where they are, right? Like, or
Yes.
noticing that you're like, hey, come to the table, and they don't. It's like, hey, what's getting in the way? Like, what's
Mhm.
making that hard for you to come over here right now? And it may
Yeah.
not be physical, it may be emotional, or maybe just tired, or maybe they didn't hear us, right? Of just like giving that space to understand instead of jumping to the conclusion that we know exactly why they're being so disrespectful and not getting up to
Yeah.
come to the table of like being curious and compassionate. I love grace. Yeah.
I feel like with rebellious teens, which I think like I had like a little bit of a rebellious era where I just thought it would be fun, you know, to test out the waters. It did not go so well for me. But
Yes.
but it's just it's not in my DNA to be like that, but like just maybe trying to figure out what the root of some of that is, where
Hmm.
that's coming from.
Yeah. Well, and I think, we don't recognize even with little kids, but especially with teenagers, it's like we don't have a lot of control, right?
Yeah.
Like we get up, we follow the rules, we do the routine to get to school, to go to school all day, to follow the rules, to come home, to go to sports practice or whatever. And then also following our family's rules. And it's like, where is their choice? Where is their
Yeah.
autonomy?
Where's
Where
their
are we?
freedom? Yeah. Where can we give them a little bit of that control back?
Yeah. Right. And being more flexible in that. And not that we have to do it in everything, but I think it's the conversation and finding the things that are meaningful for them. Because what might be autonomy that I want may not be meet the same threshold for you of autonomy, or feeling like your parents are giving you some space or control. And so like it's really about talking to each of your kids about what they need, right? Or how you can support them on that day or this week, or like, hey, this week is going to be super busy. What can I do? And they're like, I really want lasagna. And you're like, okay, so can we do that Thursday? Because that's how it's going to work out. And then it's like, we're talking about that because that feels supportive for them.
Yeah.
Or it might be, like I'd rather wait to do my chores until the weekend. And it's like, okay, can we make that work? And it might be like, well, we still need the dishwasher unloaded, or negotiating through that, because as adults, we negotiate through things. We say,
Yeah.
oh, I actually can't do that. But sometimes we forget to give our kids that same human grace of
Mhm.
like, they have a lot on their plate. And the more we are curious and know about it, the more we can give that grace. I like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, what would you want to say specifically to teens around balancing things in their life? What do you want them to know?
I would just say like trying to be in touch with yourself, like finding that analytical side to yourself is such a valuable skill. Listening to your body, listening to yourself, figuring out what feels good, what doesn't, what's exhausting, and what you could do for yourself to problem solve through things for yourself. Like, hey, like my life would be a million times better if I just stopped playing the guitar. Like, then maybe like bring up that conversation and being brave enough that even if it's something that makes you feel less strong and it makes you feel weak and it makes you a little bit embarrassed to say, being brave enough to tell at least one person that you think will listen to you and will take you seriously and won't judge you for it. Find that one
Mhm.
person, like take the time to find that one person in your life. Hopefully you've had them for a bit. Hopefully it's, a parent or a sibling or a friend or a teacher, just somebody that you have in your life already. If you don't, seek that out because it might just really, really change your life to be able to even just start that conversation and get to somewhere where that's going to be better for you. Because I mean, it's not that we can avoid it entirely, but if people could not have the path that I had, I think that would be pretty great. I talk about my mental health struggles in hopes that like it just helps one person avoid this kind of pain and trauma.
Mhm.
And if you feel like maybe you have a parent or two parents that are not quite aligned with what we're saying right now, helping them find resources to kind of change their perspective and their understanding of what maybe a relationship with a parent and a kid could be like.
Yeah, because it can be so lovely. It
Mhm.
it can be something that is, like, transformative. I love it when I see parents who have teenagers or adults that have a really healthy relationship and their kids are talking to them about a lot of things. I'm not going to say everything because I think
Yeah.
that's probably not possible,
Realistic.
maybe,
Yeah.
right? Like, but I think we just shooting for honesty and that we are open enough to hear what they have to say to be able to help them problem solve. Because, while we're around, it's nice if they want us to help teach them or work through things. But I think the way that we do that is by coming at it from a way of hearing what they have to say, actually listening to what that is, and
Yeah.
then getting curious about that part. Yeah, it's a journey, right?
Journey. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
might be shaking your parents' world if you're like asking them to sort of like shift some of their more like foundational perspectives on things. Like I know
Mhm.
for my parents being immigrant parents and coming from a completely different world, and same with my husband's family, like it's like what they grew up with, like it's just like what's here is just completely different for them. And so I think it is like a process and it is a journey. And my parents have been very curious and very excited to kind of learn a new culture, and like they're very much so immersed in the world that I grew up in. I think that my husband's parents came about a decade later, so they're at a completely different stage in that journey. um, but they're still on that journey. And so I think like every parent is willing to do that for their kid. And so just like I think as a kid, if you have a situation like that, then just help your parent help you. You have a little bit of power in that realm.
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's also giving our parents grace, right? To understand
Yeah.
that they are not going to know all of the things or do it right every time, and to be able to say like, "Hey, can we do this differently?" Or like, "When you do it like this, it feels really good for me," or "It's really hard when it goes like this. What other ways can we come up with?" Or right? Like to
Yeah.
be curious about that part as a kid too, to say, why do you think you responded like that? Like what was that for
Mhm.
you? Right.
Yeah.
And to understand, because as parents, we're coming to this table with all of our stuff too, whether it's a different culture. I mean, this is a new experience every year. I'm like always like, I haven't ever raised a whatever
Yeah.
before. Like, I haven't raised you on this day before. So, like, I'm still learning. There's so
Yeah.
many things that are still emerging, and we're all doing this together. So, I love this idea of having it being a collaborative journey, like using supportive resources, right? Whether that's our parents or our friends' parents or a teacher, whoever, somebody who
Yeah.
believes in us to help us with this journey, and also being honest about where we're at,
Mhm.
about sharing what's going on, because too much is too much, right? And sometimes we
Yeah.
do need to quit playing the violin, or we do need to quit playing so many sports, or we need to focus on one thing, or we take a total break from athletics and just focus on academics for now, or
Mhm.
whatever. We want to speak a totally different language, and we're going to figure out how to do that. And and as parents, we can be part of this team. So I love this idea.
I love that. It's like acting as a unit as opposed to like separated individuals.
Yeah, which I think is really the goal, right? Like
Yeah.
it's about us being collaborative, working together to help raise ourselves, but then also raise our
Yeah.
kids. So
That's
thank you
ultimately what takes
again.
pressure.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Thank you again so much for all of this. Like all these conversations we had have been lovely. So I'm so excited that you came back for the third time.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. Such a dream to be here again.
Thanks again, Slesha. That was fantastic information. I am still thinking about all the things we just talked about. I know that too much can be too much, obviously, but helping our daughters to identify when that is and to set boundaries and to prioritize what their body is telling them and to listen to themselves was such fantastic advice. And I think we all can do that better in modeling that for our kids, but also just supporting our teens and setting boundaries and allowing themselves to identify what and when and how things are going to go that have values for them, right? Like if soccer is too much, then let's sit down and talk about it and figure out what can we change here. If they're struggling with academics, how do we help support them? With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that you showed up to grow your parenting toolbox today. We would love for you to rate and subscribe to our show. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And also keep the emails coming. We are loving all the emails with all the suggestions for topics to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.